A cardinal returns from Rome and declares under his own name that the Pope is governing the Church exceptionally well. In the same days, an archbishop says exactly the opposite. How is a contradiction of that magnitude possible between two men who both hold real authority within the same institution? The answer is not a mystery requiring extensive investigation. It is a single event that functioned as a detonator, forcing into the open a division that had been building quietly for years. The consecration of 4 bishops by the Society of St. Pius X on July 1st and the excommunication that followed it. Because that act, which many assumed was a contained dispute between Rome and a small traditionalist group at the margins of Catholic life, ended up forcing the entire Church to reveal herself. And in the days since, almost everyone with a voice in this conversation has shown their hand. By the end of this video, you will understand why, after July 1st, the crisis inside the Catholic Church can no longer be concealed, and why the people naming it are no longer only the traditionalists who have always named it. Begin with a calm and authoritative voice. Cardinal DiNardo, Archbishop Emeritus of Galveston-Houston, returned from the June consistory and offered reassurance to the faithful of his diocese through their diocesan newspaper. The Catholics of Texas, he said, can be completely at ease. Pope Leo is governing the Church very, very well, with gentleness, but with decisiveness when the situation requires it. He added something specific about the Pope's formation. He is a canonist. Under Leo, everything is done with a strong sense of purpose, everything with great clarity. A portrait of order, of calm, of confident leadership. This is a legitimate position, and it deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as institutional flattery. There are people within the Church, people with genuine access to the Pope's governance and genuine experience of how decisions are actually being made, who look at Leo XIV and see precisely what DiNardo describes. A prudent helmsman who listens carefully before he speaks, who moves with deliberation rather than impulse, who has brought a canonist's precision to an office that requires exactly that kind of careful attention to procedure and consequence. But in the same days, from another part of the Church entirely, an opposite voice rises. And this is not the voice of an excitable young priest posting inflammatory commentary online. It is the voice of a Polish archbishop, Jan Paweł Lęga, a man who lived through and suffered under Soviet communism in Kazakhstan, who watched priests taken to prison for the crime of practicing their faith, who has known persecution directly, in his own body, in a way that very few churchmen commenting on the current crisis can claim to have known. Looking at the consecrations carried out by the Society at Econ, Lęga described what he witnessed there. These are his own words. He said he saw a peace, a joy, an atmosphere of prayer, a solemnity, and he added something pointed. Nothing similar, he said, can be seen any longer in the post-conciliar Church. Then he named the contrast that struck him most forcefully. Within the society, he observed, there is a genuine life of prayer. There are young people, new churches are being built, and they do not want to separate themselves from the See of Peter. These are harsh words directed at Rome, and we report them here as his stated opinion rather than as a verdict this channel is endorsing. It needs to be said with complete clarity that Lęga, like some other elderly prelates who have spoken in similarly severe terms, arrives at conclusions about the current pontificate that we do not share. Because for us, the Pope remains the Pope, regardless of the criticisms that can legitimately be raised about specific decisions and policies. But the contrast Lęga points to, between the vitality he observed among the traditional communities and the crisis so many others perceive surrounding them, is not something that can simply be waved away as the bitterness of an old man nostalgic for a church that no longer exists. Here are the two images, placed side by side exactly as they have been offered to the Catholic public in these same weeks. On one side, the Pope is governing very well. Everything is clear. Everything proceeds with order and purpose. On the other side, a church that enormous numbers of faithful, priests, and even bishops experience as torn by division and genuine pain. Both of these things cannot simultaneously be fully true in the way each is being presented. Either the governance is excellent, or the Church is inside a crisis that is breaking the hearts of the faithful who love her. Logic does not permit both descriptions to occupy the same reality without one of them requiring significant qualification. Into this contradiction stepped a commentator on an episode of LifeSite News TV, Frank Wright, with an observation sharp enough that it has continued circulating in Catholic conversation since he made it. No one, Wright said, would describe as excellent the head of a company or the leader of a nation if that company or that nation found itself in the condition the Catholic Church currently finds itself in. Calling this excellent governance, he said, is a curious departure from reality. There is a detail reported by several commentators following the consistory that has fed these doubts rather than resolving them. Leo XIV reportedly asked the assembled cardinals to show him public support following the consistory's discussions. Dinardo, returning home, did precisely that, offering the public endorsement his diocesan newspaper subsequently published. Father Charles Murr, appearing on the same program, read the situation in a way that deserves to be reported honestly as his interpretation. When a leader has to ask to be publicly supported, he said, that itself is a sign of weakness. Genuine affection, he continued, is not requested. It arises on its own, unprompted. This is his opinion, not an established fact, but it is an observation that gives one pause, regardless of where one stands on the broader question. The heart of the matter, however, extends beyond any individual cardinal, archbishop, or commentator, and this is the point that changes the shape of the entire conversation. After July 1st, the crisis inside the Catholic Church can no longer be packaged neatly as a dispute between Rome and four stubborn traditionalists at Icon. Because, and this is the detail that matters most, the people expressing genuine discomfort about the direction of the Church are no longer only traditionalists. Increasingly, they are bishops, priests, and canonists who have no particular attachment to the traditional movement at all and no history of sympathy for the Society of St. Pius X. The Society itself explained, in a single sentence, why it proceeded with the consecrations, despite everything Rome had communicated in the preceding days. They did so, in their own words, to continue publicly denouncing the errors present in the current magisterium, and, in doing so, to safeguard the Catholic faith in its integrity. Whether one agrees with that framing or not, it represents a position arrived at through genuine theological conviction, not a caprice or an act of institutional vandalism undertaken without reflection. And here enters the move that has ignited the wider debate more than any other single development since the consecrations themselves: the canonical recourse. The Society formally challenged the excommunication decree, appealing to the Church's own law, invoking the very legal system that the decree itself claimed to be applying. Archbishop Vigano praised this move specifically. For him, the recourse is a correct and opportune step, one that forces the Holy See to reveal its actual intentions rather than allowing the matter to remain in the safer territory of a decree issued and never subsequently defended in detail. The recourse compels the fundamental question into the open, in public, where everyone can see the arguments made on both sides. Were those consecrations a genuine schism, or were they a defense of the faith that has always been believed and taught? Someone will now have to answer that question with actual arguments in front of everyone, rather than with a decree that simply asserts its own conclusion. And on one point, the canonists who have examined the situation largely agree. Until the case is decided, the recourse suspends the effects of the decree. Even the Church's own law, arguably the single institutional structure that has remained most nearly unchanged in its fundamental form since the Council, is now being used in defense of the very community that many assumed had placed itself permanently outside its protection. Meanwhile, the paradox surrounding this entire situation has grown almost grotesque, and it is worth naming plainly because the faithful watching these events are noticing it whether commentators name it or not. Several bishops have warned their people against attending society masses, framing the traditional liturgy as spiritually dangerous, as a path towards schism, as something requiring active pastoral discouragement. And yet, it has been documented repeatedly that some of these same bishops participate without evident hesitation in interreligious ceremonies. The ancient Mass of the Roman Rite, celebrated for over 1,000 years by saints and doctors of the Church, is treated as too risky for the faithful to attend. A liturgical rite belonging to another religion entirely is attended without comparable warning or comment. This is the double standard that increasing numbers of ordinary Catholics with no ideological stake in the traditionalist movement have begun to notice and to name openly. A priest featured on the same program that carried Frank Wright's commentary told a bitter and specific anecdote that captures the situation with more force than any abstract argument could. In confession, he said, almost any sin can be named and absolved, but say the words, "I attend the traditional Mass," and it becomes in practice treated as though it were the one unforgivable transgression. Stated plainly like that, the absurdity becomes visible as something closer to an institutional rule than an isolated pastoral misjudgment. Father Murr, on that same program, offered an observation about the intensity of some reactions against the ancient Mass that goes further than institutional inconsistency and edges into something he described as genuinely unsettling. He recounted the story of a parish priest in Madrid who, at the mere mention of the word tridentine, reacted with what witnesses described as an explosion of anger, disproportionate to anything the situation called for. A reaction like that, Murr suggested, has something in it that does not feel entirely natural or proportionate to a simple disagreement about liturgical preference. This is his interpretation, offered as commentary rather than established fact, but it points to something that many Catholics who have witnessed similar reactions in their own dioceses have quietly wondered about without having the language to name it. At this point, however, it is essential to pause, because the risk inside all of this noise is falling into the opposite error from institutional denial. The fact that growing numbers of serious, credentialed, non-traditionalist voices are now criticizing the direction the Church is taking does not authorize anyone to declare the Pope deposed or to construct a parallel church operating outside his authority. The Pope remains the Pope. Sedevacantism, whatever certain voices at the extreme edge of this conversation may argue, remains a theological dead end, a path that Catholic ecclesiology cannot sustain, and that the Society of St. Pius X itself has consistently and explicitly rejected. The Society repeats this at every opportunity available to it. It does not want to separate from Peter. It wants to be recognized within the Church of Rome, in full communion, while preserving the liturgical and doctrinal inheritance it believes that communion requires rather than excludes. Anyone who appeals to Rome's own law, as the Society did by filing its canonical recourse, is not founding a new religion. They are doing the opposite. They are asserting their belonging to the institution whose law they are invoking. A community that had genuinely left the Church would have no interest in what Canon 1353 says about the suspensive effect of an appeal. It would not care what the apostolic signatura might eventually rule. It would simply proceed, indifferent to Rome's judgment because it no longer recognized Rome's authority over it. The Society's recourse says the opposite. It says, "We still recognize this court. We still submit to this law. We are asking this institution from within to apply its own principles to our case with the consistency it claims for itself elsewhere." The real point, then, is not about individual personalities, not about Dinardo versus Lenga, not about which cardinal or archbishop has correctly diagnosed the health of the current pontificate. The real point is this. A single act, the consecrations of July 1st, functioned as a mirror, and that mirror has shown the Church a crisis that had been present for a long time, but that many people, inside and outside the institution's official structures, had been quietly pretending not to see. There are those who deny the crisis exists at all and insist that everything is proceeding excellently. There are those who exaggerate the crisis to the point of rupture, using it as justification for positions the Church's own tradition cannot support. Positions that place them, however sincerely motivated, outside the visible unity they claim to be defending. And then there is the narrow and difficult path in between, the path this channel has tried to walk throughout its coverage of these events. Recognize the crisis honestly, without minimizing it and without pretending institutional reassurance settles what it does not actually settle. Remain faithful to the doctrine that has always been taught, without allowing frustration with specific decisions or specific dicasteries to curdle into rejection of the papacy itself. And above all, pray for the Pope, that he may govern with the clarity the Church so visibly needs and so visibly lacks in this specific and painful moment. Because, as an elderly priest on that same program put it, the Catholic faithful of today should not be afraid to look the Church's problems directly in the face. Not in order to sit in judgment over anyone, not to elevate their own private opinion above the authority Christ established, but in order to mature in faith with their eyes open and their hearts steady. A faith that requires willful blindness to remain intact is not a strong faith. It is a fragile one, protected only by the refusal to look too closely at what surrounds it. A faith mature enough to see the real condition of the institution she loves and to remain faithful anyway, out of genuine conviction rather than manufactured comfort, is the faith the current moment actually requires. The consecrations carried out by the Society of St. Pius X will, in time, pass into history alongside 1988 and every other episode in this long and painful chapter of the Church's recent life. Canonical processes will run their course, the apostolic signatura will eventually rule, or the case will be resolved through some other mechanism the Church's law provides. The headlines that dominated Catholic media in these weeks will recede, replaced eventually by whatever crisis or controversy comes next. But the question these consecrations forced into the open will not pass so easily. It will remain, sitting underneath every subsequent controversy, every synodal document, every consistory, every cardinal's public reassurance, and every archbishop's public warning. Which church do we actually want? One that continually adjusts itself to keep pace with the surrounding world, reshaping its vocabulary and its priorities to remain comprehensible and acceptable to a culture that is moving further from Christian conviction with each passing year. Or one that holds fast to what she has always guarded, even at the cost of being called rigid, even at the cost of losing the world's approval, precisely because guarding Christ faithfully has always mattered more than being liked by the age she happens to be living through. The facts, eventually, will give their answer. They always do, though rarely on the timeline anyone watching would prefer. In the meantime, what remains for the ordinary Catholic caught between DiNardo's reassurance and Lenga's alarm? between a decree and a recourse, between a synod that speaks constantly of accompaniment and a Mass that has formed saints for 15 centuries, is exactly what it has always been. The faith received from the apostles, the sacraments, certain and unchanging in what they accomplish, regardless of which side of this dispute administers them validly. And a steady, unspectacular fidelity that does not require Rome to resolve every contradiction before it can continue believing, worshiping, and hoping. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Amen. God bless you.